Alan! 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 Alan!
Greetings and salutations, I'm Jordan the IT guy, and today let's chat about something just a little bit different. Now, for those of you who've been following along in the series, this is going to be a little bit of a deviation away from that path. We're going to jump into a couple of little bit different concepts. However, I couldn't pass the opportunity by today because today is Groundhog Day, and so it seemed like the perfect opportunity to chat about a little concept called recursion. Now, if you've ever watched the movie Groundhog Day before, I'm hoping this is giving you an idea of where this is going. And if you haven't watched the movie Groundhog Day before, I highly encourage you to go watch the movie Groundhog Day for no other reason than it'll help give you some context. Recursion is a concept, though, in programming where we can basically repeatedly do a task over and over again using the same body of code. Very, very similar to certain events that happen within Groundhog Day, where the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again. Now, in PowerShell and in various types of code, there are many different ways to accomplish this. One of the most common ways of doing this is via something like a loop. Not necessarily the recursion by its nature, it's not calling itself, it's simply doing the task. It's iterating over a sequence, or it's doing something until a condition is true. Now, let's go ahead and jump into a few examples of loops and what they look like, and then a functional example of something where there's something using recursion. Now, I won't be using a loop inside of this particular event of recursion, but I want you to understand how loops work first, in case you haven't seen any before we jump into our recursion example. Let's jump into it. Okay, before we go any further, it's important to know there are a few different types of loop within PowerShell. There is the for loop, which allows you to specify, I would like to do this thing a set number of times, where you do a counting increment or something like that. There's a bunch of different ways to do it. Essentially, you're saying until this thing becomes true, or once this thing becomes true, we want to have this then end the loop. There's also the for each loop, which says, hey, for each item in a list, or for each item in a collection, or for each part of an object or something of that nature, go ahead and do this task. So we would write something in here like do the thing, right? Like write host the thing, right? So for each item in the list, we'd write host the thing, okay? We can also do another type of loop, like a do until loop, which is basically a scenario where we say, hey, do this code until a particular condition returns true. We also have the do while loop, which says, hey, do this while it's true, and when it becomes not true, then you can stop doing it. Now, these are all cool ways to accomplish a task. They're all different types of loop. They're all different methods of code, things like that. However, there is another scenario, that other scenario of recursion, where maybe the condition, or maybe we want to continue down a tree so far, right, before we stop at the end of it. An example for this might be something like the get child item commandlet. If you've never seen that before, it looks like this, where we say, hey, go get child item. Now, if you run that in a directory, like my user profile, it would go get all of the objects in that. But maybe you want to get not just the objects that are in that directory, but everything underneath it. Well, if you write space-recurse, PowerShell understands you'd like to run get child item, return all of the folders, and then run get child item on those, get all of the folders, and so on and so forth, and output all of that data back to the screen, which is pretty neat. Now, that's pretty complicated and a pretty complicated implementation of recursion, so let's look at something a little bit simpler. For this, I've already coded an example ahead of time that's going to be an example of how we can take a function, and that if we hand the function a number, it's going to work its way to 0. Now, it doesn't care what the number is, as long as it's a whole number and it's of type int32. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So as you can see here, I have a little function. It's just a function called send thing to 0. It takes a parameter of type number. The first thing it does is it uses a concept of conditionals to evaluate if the number is equal to 0. If the number is equal to 0, we just return the number. We stop recursing, right? We're done. Else, if the number is less than 0, we need to make the number bigger. We need to get closer to 0. So we're going to write, hey, we're going to add 1 to this, okay? So we're going to go ahead and say, hey, send thing to 0. So we need to rerun the function. So you can see right here, this is the recursion concept. We're saying, hey, call the function again, but with a different value. And otherwise, well, then the number must need to be made smaller, and so we can just rerun it. So for the purposes of this, we're going to start with send thing to 0, number -5, until if we just highlight this in our editor and push F8, we can actually see the process that it runs through as it works the number down from -5 or up from -5 to 0. And if we go ahead and run this with the number 5 and we run that, we can see as it works its way from 5 down to 0. Cool. And that's all we've got for recursion today. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I hope that this was helpful to your understanding, and I hope you have a happy Groundhog Day. Thanks for watching.